there's some interesting different topics, but since we have kind of a more intimate group today, perhaps we could talk about something that you're interested in. All right?
A question.
Yeah. So just before,
Yeah, sure.
We have a more of an intimate setting here. So really think of it as more of like a personal consultation. Whatever you're interested in, whatever questions you have for me, or what I do, or anything you're interested in that you want to ask about, why we're here in Masters of Calm, what you're looking for. Use it for more of an open platform now. If you want, then I can just kind of talk. I have lots of things to talk about, but I'm giving you this opportunity to ask any question you're interested in life, or to me anything about what I do or what we do, or any personal thing you're going through, or whatever you're interested in here, or even just debating something. It's very engaging that way. So, what is your question?
How to know if God is pleased with my service?
Wow, that's a great question. It's going really high, really quick. So what do you think? You have any other questions or anything you want to talk about, or you want me to just give a presentation? Anything? You have a question?
I do have some questions. Regarding, a simple question regarding the meaning of life. And do I need to have a meaning of life, an objective, a clear objective that I have to seek for something, or just have a smaller objectives in life, like raising children and trying to live a happy life? And is this enough to feel the meaning in the life or fulfillment?
Beautiful question.
I would like about Bhakti Yoga. I understood that this will be about that.
Yes.
And if I know it right, it's about love, how to be in the state of love.
Yes.
And in practice, it's not easy in real life. So how to keep it this life, and maybe to return to it as quickly as possible. Then is stressful events around.
Yeah, how to practice love when we're surrounded by problems and stress.
Yes, because we understand it's a really important thing, but in reality it is covered under this stress and fears and other things. So how to make it come to the surface more often, as often as possible.
All right, so try to address them, and if I get it right, please let me know. In the search for meaning, right? And the search for meaning, and is it enough to find meaning in our responsibilities and caring for those we love in this world? And is that okay?
Yep.
And how to know if our service is pleasing to God?
Yes.
And how to develop love and devotion despite all the troubles and stress and anxieties and fears and struggles around us in the world. So we can start with that. That's a good point to start with. Nice mountain to climb, you could say. If we can understand something of that. Maybe we can just start with just some breathing, though, just to kind of get into a state of openness to absorbing some kind of spiritual wisdom. We don't have to do the actual pranayama, but we can just do some breathing exercises and some om, perhaps. So we'll just inhale deeply, fill your body up with oxygen, and then as we exhale, we'll chant the om. Om is described to be the seed of creation. So all kind of creative power, while performing this chant along with what's called tapas, or this sadhana practice, then it develops all power within you to create the world and the life that you want to live. Meaning, create the world in your life and how you want to live. That's through the sadhana, so we can breathe together. Just meditate on the sound and create some stillness and try to become internally present, forgetting the outside world for a few minutes. Breathing again. Meditating on the sound and trying to draw our energies inward. Focus on the inward state instead of the outward distraction. Described to be the sound form of creation itself. Starts at the bottom of the throat, 3 syllables, a, u, ma. Om starts down at the bottom of the throat, u, then it's in the mouth, and ends with the lips, ma. It's described to be creation, maintenance, devastation, the 3 cycles of life. It's also described to represent the soul, love, and God. The relationship of the soul, God, and His beloved. But also by chanting this, it's described to be the seed mantra from which all the Gayatri and all the Vedas originated. If you look at quantum mechanics even, they talk about string theory, and it's how it's all vibration. It's all sound vibration. Right? On the most fundamental, deepest level of existence of everything, the substrata of everything is the energy and sound. So they say everything is manifesting from the sound, but spiritual sound. So I'll try to address those questions. I'm going to do a brief invocation. We usually stay up late at night doing our kirtan. We stay up to about 12:30, and then I was having some conference calls and Zoom, so I'm going to try to give you the best of what I have, the energy I have, and try to pray to give some kind of answer that will be meaningful and helpful. So that's why we do our prayers before I start any talk. We do a few prayers to our teachers and to our line and to what we understand as the Absolute. So thank you for your patience, and if you want to interrupt at any point while I'm talking and kind of go back and forth, please, feel free to interrupt and have this like a conversation rather than a dissertation or a sermon. Let's approach it more like a conversation, and we'll just see where it leads us, okay? Om Ajnanaatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Jena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namah. Guruve Gaurachandraya Radhikaye Tadalaye Krishnaya Krishna Bhaktaya Tada Bhaktaya Namo Namaha. Bandeham Shri Guru Varam Shri Rupanuga Pravaram Brajrasa Rasikam Cha Narayanam Tang Prapanam Shri Gurum Charanam Bande Ramana Pristaya Bhutale Rupanuga Bhaktidam Cha Kripa Murti Narayanam Seva Kunje Braje Ramye Govardhane Kiro Sada Radha Kundir Sanande Tat Tat Seva Pradayakam Gurung Narayanakyam Tam Vande Vinoda Pristakam Yat Parasmriti Matrena Damodara Prasiddhati Narayanam Namaskrityam Naram Chaiva Narotamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Toto Jayamudhirayat Nasta Praeshva Badreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavata Utamasloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naistaki Aho Bhagyam Nanda Gopa Brajokasam Yanmitrang Paramanandam Purnang Brahma Sanatanam Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Shri Guruji Maharaj Ki Jai Shri Prabhupada Ki Jai Gaur Nityananda Prabhu Ki Jai Shri Radha Ramanju Ki Jai 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 Shri Radhe Shyam. Welcome. So just before I start, I want to give you a brief setting of how I'm approaching the topic. Firstly, I'm not here in an effort to convert or proselytize. I'm here to share the wisdom I've received from my teachers and the love I've experienced with them, through them. And if any of it's helpful, you're welcome to accept or not, even a little bit or however you like. But please understand, my intention is not to convince or convert, just to share hopefully something that can help us live and lead a better life, or at least a good life, or continue as we are if it's already good. So because this is a very spiritual question in nature, I will address it colored by my faith and what I've learned from my teachers. Yesterday we told the story of Viktor Frankl, who wrote a book called The Search for Meaning. He was in the Nazi concentration camps for some years, and he survived it because of what he described as his search for meaning. So to your question, is it enough to love and care for one's family and do one's duties in this world? Is that enough to achieve fulfillment? The answer is yes. If you do that properly, in Vedic thought, that's what's called Vanashrama Dharma, which means to fulfill your responsibilities in this world as God has placed you in this world, to take care of those who are depending on you, to love and to cherish. The real question comes when, what do we do in the face of inevitable suffering? And when world doesn't go as we like it, things don't go as planned, what will sustain us beyond that? So you can say taking up righteous, noble responsibility is part of the means to overcome suffering and to find meaning. But there's also a spiritual essence to being that transcends the circumstances of this life even. And therefore, there's a reason for the spiritual quest, seeking knowledge of the real self. There's different paths to attain that. There's the path of action, there's the path of knowledge, there's the path of devotion, karma yoga, gyan yoga, bhakti yoga. And so people approach it differently according to their path and their process. But for us, the first stage of real knowledge is knowing the self beyond the body and mind, not just as the body and mind. And so, if you can know the self and be situated in the self, you can still fulfill all your duties and responsibilities with love, loving your family, caring for them, protecting them, and finding meaning in that responsibility and that exchange of love and service. But you'll be based on a deeper essence in which you can actually sustain that. And you can understand what it really means at the highest level to be a good father or to be a good mother. Not just a good father or a good mother, but the best father, the best mother. In our Vedic thought, it's described that a parent should be someone who is capable of liberating the children from the web of samsara and suffering. So if you can meditate on that, of to be a good father, to be the best father, not only am I caring for them, protecting them, taking responsibility in my life, working hard to maintain my family, that's all noble action. If it's done properly without causing harm to others, that's all dharma. To fulfill your responsibilities in this life, that's dharmic. But also you should consider that responsibility for another life includes the responsibility for freeing them from suffering. Not ultimately you have to free yourself too, but if you've brought someone into this world, are they going to experience suffering? Nowadays in the world, there's a lot of confusion around this topic. Should we even have children? Some people say. Why? The world is so bad. I've talked with a lot of people. The world is going through so much turmoil and violence and war that should I even have children? And the answer is yes, of course. But take responsibility for helping them know their true self and ultimately transcend suffering as well. That's a spiritual path. So in other words, if you're able to truly help them, you also have to be able to help yourself. And so there's many different paths, but we can't avoid certain kinds of suffering. Right? We say birth and death, disease, suffering, old age. The Buddha taught these things happen to all mortal beings. So meaning can be attained by taking care of those we love, but we should also be aware of the difficult situation we are in this world and not be blind to all the sufferings of others. We may have a good family life, but others may be suffering immensely. And so if we truly develop a sense of world family, then we feel the suffering of others as our own. And so we should try to minimize their suffering as well. So therefore we say to really know the self is to transcend the false ego of the mind and the body as the self. And that doesn't mean that we don't take responsibilities in this life. It just means that we also take responsibility to realize we're not just this body. And what are we then? There's the path of what we are not, and there's the path of what are we. So we've been talking about this the last few days. The soul is described to be Satchidananda, eternally existing consciousness, energy, seeking blissful relationship. So there's an interesting story that perhaps can shed a little light on this topic. It's from our faith, our scripture, the Bhagavad Puran. Krishna, who we understand to be the Supreme Absolute in his manifestation, one time when he was a boy, it's a very interesting story, teaching us about highest self interest even. You can ask him to talk a little further away, quietly. Thank you. In the Vedanta literature, Vedanta is 550 short aphorisms. That's the summary of all spiritual knowledge. It's okay. You can sit in the forest a little bit. It's okay. So the Vedanta says something very interesting. It says, when we love someone, what is it that we really love? And this ties into the idea of knowing the self. There is a thing that is like genuine love, but really when we love someone in this world, there is some amount of self-interest there. It's not a negative thing, it's just a reality, right? Even if we were to say the people we marry, people who we love. Why? It means it gives us happiness. So we love them, we marry them, we have children with them. So in the Vedanta it says, really it is the self that is loved. And then when you love the self, then you love another that increases your experience of happiness. And so the children, the father, the wife, the husband, it is the self that is loved. So that's not a criticism, it's just a reality. So then there's a story that's told. This is a very interesting story. Krishna, as a young boy, he was performing what we call human-like pastimes, just playing with his friends. And this is described in our scripture to have happened like around 5,000 years ago. And it's very interesting, but just theoretically accept the situation and hear the story. You don't have to believe in my belief system, but hear the story out. So Narayan, who is described to be the god from whose pores emanate all existence, for example. Narayan in Sanskrit means the resting place of all life, of all living beings. And so the example is given that Lord Narayan is laying in the ocean of cosmic creation. And from his pores, from every pore, with his exhalation of breath, all the universes of this existence are manifesting. The metaphor is given. If you look at multiverse theory, or you look at where the science is kind of going towards, it's described how even if you look at the emanation and contraction of this material existence, it's very similar in teaching. It just doesn't have the personality behind it. But it's described that Narayan, from his pores, all existence is emanating in one breath. And as he breathes back in, all existence comes back within him until his next exhalation. It's described to last approximately 312 trillion years. One manifestation of all the universes as we know them, and then withdrawing back within him. And as they are within him, during that period of rest, All living beings are resting within him. That is Narayan. That is the meaning of Narayan. And all those universes are described to be like bubbles on the surface of the ocean, existing for a brief moment. So this moment that we are in now, it's 1/8 of a second within 312 trillion years that is all present in one breath of God. That's our philosophy. All of the existences we live, like scientists say the Earth is about 4 billion years old. And this universe came into being, so forth, and so, 12 billion years or 8 billion years, they're still debating it when the Big Bang started. That Big Bang is like the exhalation of all existence, of this universe and other universes, and all came into being. But that amount of time, and the example is given to give us a scope of what it means to be eternal or infinite, right? What does it mean to be eternal or infinite? If the moment we are in it's called like a nimesha, in Vedic thought again, the time it takes the speed of light particles, to cross over an atom, that's described to be the smallest part of time. What's the speed of light? So the time it takes a particle of light to cross over the breadth of one atom, right? And then on the large scale, the macro scale, one breath of God is described to be 312 trillion years. So what is our lifespan in comparison? All the relationships and the experiences in this life, that's why it's described to be like a dream. It's true. In our thought system, we exist. The world exists. Everything is substantial. But because it's so transitory, like a blink of an eye, if you scale back, the life we're living now is just a brief second in time. And so in the beginning of the Gita, Krishna asked the question, where was I before I was born? Where will I be after I die? Now yesterday we had an interesting point. If you look at the law of physics and thermodynamics, it says that matter can't be destroyed, it only transforms. So we said matter reincarnates. Even if you don't believe in reincarnation, after death, the matter that comprises your body, the fire, the earth, the water, the air, the ether, it's going to be reborn in some way or another. So now the question is, if matter can reincarnate, what about the spirit? The spirit, actually, it's a very subtle thing. Like, do you believe in reincarnation? No, we don't. The soul doesn't reincarnate, it's always existing. Consciousness is always existing. That is called satta. Consciousness always exists. Matter is what transforms. Consciousness is Brahman, the great spirit, doesn't transform. Pure consciousness. So until we really know the self, what is that consciousness that I am? Who am I? Then we're existing in various states of illusory life, Maya. And so I'm just kind of circling around. I'm going to tell an interesting story about this. But the idea is, the answer is yes. You can find meaning and fulfillment in that function of your responsibilities and caring for those you love and genuinely loving. Just because it's temporary doesn't mean we shouldn't love fully. Just because it's a temporary experience. The example of God's breath lasting the entire life of the universe and all of creation, what to speak of one universe, is just to give us an example of how brief our lifespan is. And yet, the Vedas teach us that the soul pervades beyond this life, before birth, after death. In what state? Now, our job in human life is to raise our consciousness so that we don't stay on a very kind of stunted level of growth. So there's described to be 5 levels of consciousness. Like an animal has consciousness, but it's not as developed as a human being. The animal's search for meaning doesn't bother with that. The animal's search for meaning is just to eat, to try to protect oneself, if one's a prey, to hide, to find some security, to be able to avoid danger. If you're a prey animal, a predator animal, then you survive by hunting. So you're searching for food, eating. It's one of the principles of life in this existence. We need to eat to survive. And we eat by eating others. It's the basic law of nature. Jiva jivasya jivanam. One life is food for another life. So we're always exchanging life force. Therefore, we're individuals together. What else do we have to do? We all sleep. We all procreate to continue the species, and we try to defend our space, our territory. And so that's the basic principles that animals and human beings both do. Ahar nidra bhaya maitun. And so we fear. Why do we fear things? Because we want to protect what we have. If we're fearless, it means we have nothing to fear. We're fearing, that's bhaya, means defending what we possess, wanting to protect it. So the question then comes, an animal's fulfillment comes in just eating and having a little family circle, maintaining its life, protecting its ground, right? You look at a beaver, builds a little dam, a bird builds a nest. Building a nest, protecting and feeding the family. How much of our life goes into that pursuit as human beings? In elaborate ways, right? I want to live in a skyscraper, but it's still a nest. I want to eat caviar, but it's still just food. Or I'm happy eating Gretska. It's either way, it's food. So what we say is, as human beings, we have a higher purpose than just living like animals. Again, it's not a criticism. It's just to say that human life, there's ability to go beyond, to understand the nature of the self in relationship with the Supreme Self and beyond the material state of illusion. Because we're always transferring states. The body's always changing. The bodies are always changing, and then we get attached, and then we suffer because of separation. So we may love and love and love and love, but if we're too attached in our love, then we won't be fulfilled, because when it's lost, then we'll lament. When we lose those we love by tragedy, if we're not in self-knowledge, then we'll feel lost in lamentation. 3 kinds of suffering based on time: lamenting for the past, fear of the future, confusion in the present. So we're inviting fear and confusion and lamentation into our life, which is a form of suffering, if we're not in true self-knowledge. So we say we are not the body, we are not the mind. Then the big question is, then what am I? So there's a story in the Upanishads. It said that the self is, the body is like a tree. In that tree of the body, there's 2 birds. One is the self, one is the Supreme Self. What we call the Atman and the Paramatman, the soul in God. God as described as like the sun of all being, and the soul as a particle of light. The example is given that we're part of the whole. It's not our creator, we're part of that whole. So therefore it's like our source. So therefore in the scriptures it's described that developing an understanding of yourself, self-realization and God-realization, can lead to the highest fulfillment and meaning. And then it doesn't negate all your necessary duties and responsibilities in whatever stage of life you're in. Like if you're a householder, to neglect your duties and taking care of your family, that's described to be like a neglect of your duties. It's displeasing to God. Right? If you're in family life and you have children, you say, no, I'm not going to care for them. How is that going to please God? Right? Taking responsibility for what you have is pleasing, but relationship with that inner self, the source, the divine, the absolute, God, and whatever name you want to use, that is the highest duty. And so our Guru would talk about morality, for example. He would say morality doesn't just mean the do-nots. Don't hurt people, don't steal from people, don't cheat, don't lie. Morality also means understanding your relationship with everything, and especially with the source of everything. You have some duty to that, and that is love. Develop that love and that relationship that will transcend all the temporary realities of material life. that I'm living and living again and again and again for millions of lifetimes. In our Vedic thoughts describe there's like 8,400,000 species of life. And the soul transmigrates. We don't reincarnate, we transmigrate. Subtle difference. Right? Transmigration, it means consciousness is always moving and traveling. And matter is transforming and appearing and disappearing in different forms. And so, if we come to a sense of what our real relationship with our truest self and God, or whatever name you want to use, then that relationship will enable us to transcend all the confusion and illusion of life and all the fear and lamentation. We can do our duties with love without lamenting for what we cannot control, which is the reality of birth and death. There's no use in lamenting. Krishna taught that to Arjuna in the beginning of the Gita. Don't lament for what you cannot control. It is out of your control. What is that? Birth and death. The reality of birth and death, old age and disease, as Buddha taught. That's the reality of suffering. And you can't stop that, but you can take responsibility for your own life, deliver yourself, and deliver your dependents. If you can truly deliver yourself and deliver your dependents, then you no longer have to suffer in the cycle of samsara. Krishna says that in the Gita. Ata urdvang nasangsa, I will deliver you, have no fear, but it's your choice. Like if you're in prison, there's an interesting story, a prison story. Because samsara can be described to be like a prison in one sense. Why? Because the soul has free will, but now we're conditioned and we're forced to experience action and reaction. And we don't know where it started and when it started, and so we're just like in a prison. Even though we have free will, like in a prison, you still have free will in a prison, but you're locked up, and so you can't escape. So we say the soul has free will, but because it's so conditioned now, it's as if it's in a prison. The trick is, don't get too attached to the prison if you want to ever leave. So there's a story one time of a prisoner who had so much friendship, he was like the life of the party in the prison. And he was being released on parole, and all the inmates begged him, if you leave, it's like the life of the party is going to leave. If you escape samsara, if you get liberated, then who's going to feed us? If Papa gets liberated, who's going to feed us? Who's going to make us happy and fun? If you get out of jail, what's going to happen? So it said sometimes there's the crab in a bucket syndrome. Or crabs in a net. One crab or lobster is getting out of the net, and all the other crabs pull him down. All the other lobsters pull him down. Why? Stay with us. Don't go beyond us.
Can I ask something?
Yeah.
Could you say that maybe that's why you can't see Krishna in this realm now, is because he has left, and we're like, oh, Krishna, where are you? But he's already in Bandhav, he's having a good time wherever he is.
Yeah.
We can't see him anymore.
Yes, but you can, that's true. We say we see through hearing. And through the process of cleansing the heart and the mantra that we chant, realization comes in the heart. Because the spiritual world and the material world, they're like different dimensions overlaying each other. It's described in the Sastra. Those pastimes that are going on are still going on. It's that we don't have the vision to see it. I'm going to get to an interesting Krishna story. Anyway, so there's an example about, so this prisoner, they were begging him to stay, so that they said, how are you going to stay? How are you going to stay? So he said, okay, when I'm leaving, I'm going to start punching all the guards. So I commit another felony, so they put me back in jail. Right? So in that way he stayed in jail and preferred it. Right? Better the friends I know than what I don't know beyond it. There's described to be 3 modes of nature: goodness, passion, ignorance, sattva, raja, tamas, and they all are like chains that bind us to this world. And attachment to worldly life is the binding force. This is what's also described in the scripture. Attachment to worldly life is the binding force keeping us in the prison of this world, of samsara. So how to escape? Sometimes the gold chains, you're attached to them more than the iron chains. So suffering sometimes is actually what frees us. Because suffering, or the dark night of the soul, is what leads us on the existential quest beyond the realm of samsara, beyond the illusion. And a gold chain is described to be opulence, high birth, wealth, education, beauty. We become intoxicated by that and proud of it, and then it's a more strong form of bondage. So that's why Christ would say it's more difficult to pass into the kingdom of heaven if you're very wealthy or proud of your wealth and prosperity and beauty and knowledge and education than it is to put an elephant through a needle hole. So sometimes those are described to be like gold chains. Imagine someone who's very wealthy and says, I'm happy, I'm enjoying life, I'm prosperous, I'm beautiful, I'm famous. And you look at so many movie stars and actors, they all end up in AA meetings, alcoholics, drugs, rehab. Why? Because you don't find ultimate fulfillment in that. What to speak of in taking care of the little things? You get famous, you get wealthy, you get beautiful. There's stories of Elvis Presley as an example. One of the most sought after, beautiful, famous, wealthy people. For the last 15, 20 years of his life, he was always either on uppers or downers. Whole day. They'd put him on drugs just long enough to go give a concert, and then drugs to sleep, drugs to wake, and drugs to stay awake without destroying yourself, without committing suicide, because it was so miserable. Why? All based on we're trying to love, but we don't love the inner source first as the primary duty. Coming into full integration, you could say. Integrating ourselves at the basic level first. That's what is also Bhakti Yoga. That's why we say Bhakti Yoga is a very important step. Pranayam and yoga and gyan, knowledge and karma work, these are all very important. Astanga yoga, hatha yoga, all these things are very important. But if you don't come into internal integration first, learning where to place your soul's nature, which is to love, where do you direct that love first? First, because self-love, right? It's, again, going back to the story of the Vedanta. You don't love the husband for the husband's sake or the wife for the wife's sake. You love the wife for your sake, the husband for your sake, the children for your sake. You love yourself first. It's not a problem. It's just a reality. But it's very interesting. You can see sometimes there is some little indications of pure love in this world. For example, like a mother can give her life to protect the child, or a husband to a wife. You still identify because the soul's nature is to love and to serve. That's described to be the nature of the part in relation to the whole. We exist to give and to love and to serve. So we understand that. But there's an interesting story. So Krishna once was in Vrindavan. So Narayan is the God that all the universes come from and come back into. But if you can understand that, that's still in relation to this world. Most people think of God just in relation with this world. So as we understand, Krishna is far beyond this world. He has his own spiritual worlds. And so he came from that world to this world to exhibit his human-like sweet pastimes that can attract us to him. Why Krishna is so beautiful, why his pastimes are so sweet. Just to attract us to a higher existence through the path of love and devotion. But Brahma, his own son, couldn't recognize him. It's a very interesting story. Brahma is described to be the creator, architect of the universe. Each universe is like a golden egg that emanates from the cosmic self. And in each universe, then, the cosmic self appears in another form, and then from his navel, a lotus sprouts, and on the top of that lotus, the god Brahma is born. And he creates as the architect of this world. But he thought, no, my God, my father is this Narayan. Who is this boy Krishna? And so he decided to challenge and test that boy. Krishna was playing with his friends in the forest. And one day Brahma stole all of his friends, kidnapped them, hid them in a cave along with all of his cows and his calves. Anyone heard this story before? So I'll try to do it justice without getting too long into it. So he was wandering, the boy Krishna was wandering in the forest with all his friends, and they were eating their lunch meal. To show us that relationship, there's something beyond. Most of the time when we think of God only in relation to this world. But God has his own life as well. Why not? If we were God, we discussed this a few days ago, if we were God, we'd also have our own life beyond just the problems of this world. Why not? But because we see from ourself as the subject, we see up and we think he's just thinking about us. He is, but he also has his own existence. So he was playing with his friends to attract us into existence of love and sweetness. But Brahma didn't understand. He stole all his friends, and he stole all his calves like he was protecting. And he hid them in a cave. And then he came back after he hid them in the cave and looked and saw Krishna was again surrounded by all his friends and calves. And he couldn't understand, who are these? So he looked back in the cave, and he looked back at Krishna, and he saw it. The boys were in the cave, his friends were also with him, simultaneously. Very interesting. And then when he came back, and Krishna smiled at him, and he showed him all his friends and all his cows and calves, they were all like Narayan. So it was like he was surrounded by millions of Narayans, like millions of gods. They were all expansions of himself. So he showed him that he was higher. He showed Brahma that he was higher than Narayan in this sense, that he was the source of Narayan, right? So the point of this story is that when he went home, he was gone for a year, where he had expanded himself into all his friends and all the cows. And he went back home, and when he met with his parents, all those boys who were expansions of himself, they showed so much more love to them. I can pause if you have any question on it, but I'm going to try to get into the detail of it. It's a very interesting point. He expanded his form into millions of others' friends, and he showed that they were all equal to himself because they were expansions of himself. But they looked like his regular friends, and the parents and their family members didn't know. The cows didn't know it was different from their calf, but they showed more love. With the cows, they showed more love to the older calves than the younger ones, because the older calves were the expansions of Krishna. So they showed so much more love to them. And so then our teachers would ask, why was this? Why did the cows show more love to the older calves? Generally when the cow has a baby calf, it gives all its attention to the baby calf, all the milk and all the love. And the older calf, it lets it, learn and play and eat grass and so forth. But it showed more love to the older ones, which were actually Krishna in expanded forms. And so the scripture teaches, and our gurus would tell us, because the nature of the soul is to love the self of the self, which is God. God is described to be the self of the self. So because we're naturally self-interested, we love the other because we love the self. If you can develop love for the self of the self, which is God, then from that love within, you can give love to everyone. Because your relationship, you have fully integrated yourself in your relationship with God. That is called bhakti. So love the self of the self, that is God. The Atman, the Paramatman. Understand that the Atman, the self and the Supreme Self, have a relationship that can never be broken, but yet we have turned our attention and our love towards the external world. So there's love of the world, not love of God. And so what we say is, to be a true teacher even, you have to love God, not love the world. If you love God, then you can care for the world like you care for your family. And you can love your family because you can understand that they're also part and parcel of God. In the Vedic thought, it's described that to serve the whole tree, to serve the whole tree of existence, you water the root. That's love for God. Imagine a tree, a huge tree, not like these trees, but even any of these trees, but like we have in Vedic idea, the banyan tree, and it can spread over 20 miles. Huge trees. But these trees as well, if you went up there and watered each leaf, it's not as useful as watering the root of the tree. So what we say, watering the root of the tree, means watering yourself in your relationship with the Absolute. And then that relationship can fill you up with so much power that you can give of your love and you can really care as well as deliver your family. If you understand your relationship to Spirit, and ultimately that will lead to you achieving a godly nature. If you look at, I want to draw a little bit from Christianity, but they talk about like the cardinal virtues and vice. And if you look at the virtues, it's all like love and kindness and temperance and all the positive emotions. But how can you live in that way? You have to become more godly. Developing the virtues means being more godly. How can you be more godly unless you associate with God? means to become more godly instead of more animalistic. Right? Instead of being more animalistic, become more godly. So how to become more godly? Therefore we do our sadhana, our practice. If you want to have a relationship with God, it said, Na deva devam archayet. You cannot have a relationship with God unless you become like God. That means become divine and to become divinely situated. And so, kind of going along the same route of the question now, to your question as well. There's also the idea of, again, developing that inward state of fulfillment. You'll give, like if you were to say, what does it mean, the search for meaning, fulfillment in life? Is it enough to care for my family and to love them? It's still almost like, if you just care and love them, then why do we need to ask, will I find fulfillment? It's still based on the self. Will I be happy? Will I be happy just caring for others? So therefore the answer is, develop internal relationship. Our message of happiness is that happiness comes from giving happiness. That's one idea. To please another is to be pleased yourself. But it has to be based on, like we say, watering the root of the tree. I want to get into an example from, it's a little philosophical, but Plato's The Republic. He talks about the perfect state. And he talks about the perfect state being one that is in harmony, with all the constituent parts serving the whole. And he talks about it as a city. If anyone here has read The Republic by Plato, right? He talks about the perfect city because they're trying to find justice in the self and the righteous life and a fulfilled life. So he says, they're arguing over it for a long time. So he says, okay, let's magnify the self as if it's a city. Right? And then you can understand where justice lies and where righteousness lies. And he talks about each one performing their own responsibilities according to their nature and qualification. He talks about no one having any independent desire but the betterment of the whole. That's one of the things he talks about. And so we have a very similar example we give. We talk about parts of the body all serving the essence of the whole organism. For example, your hands eat food. Are your hands benefiting from putting food in your mouth? Are they directly benefiting? You'd say, no, I'm just going to paste the food in my hands. They should get it. Why are they working to serve the stomach? Right? They are getting nourishment from it. So if you water the root of the tree, the whole tree is nourished. The root of the tree is your relationship with your spirit, essence, and with the absolute truth, or God. That is the source of your sustenance. When you feed the stomach, the whole body is nourished. The stomach is also working. So they describe that to be like the perfect state, where everyone is working with the goal of the whole organism, the welfare of everyone as their own sense of welfare. So the question comes, how can we achieve that state of well-being in our body? Because again, this was just an example to find justice within. Because if you look at the city-state, Plato was basically talking about a very kind of almost like socialist, fascist state almost. He said no private property, everyone in everyone's possession, wives and children shared. It was very interesting. But he was talking about it in terms of the parts of the body serving the whole of the body experience itself. And so that's what you could say is called dharma. It's not so much, doesn't work in political systems in this world. In this world, this political system hasn't been seen to work so well. But in the body, you can think of the body as a state as well. All the life in your body, all the bacteria, all the cells, if they're all serving their own interest, then that's what leads to cancer. Everyone's on their own thing. Everyone's doing their own independent work. So what we understand is surrender means coming into the state of wanting to serve the will of God. That is what will make him happy by our service. To your point, service that is independent never pleases. because service means to please. Service means to please the object of service. So if you're independent, how are you going to serve? If you're serving independently, it means you have to know the will and what pleases in order to please. And so it's already laid out. What is pleasing service? In the Gita, it says if you look at most religion and in Old Testament and Bible, they say, take care of your family, be a good person. That is basic level of religion. But if you do it at the expense of others suffering, that's why we preach ahimsa, non-violence. Your family shouldn't prosper at the expense of others suffering. Right? Your prosperity shouldn't come at another's expense, because then you're going to create a reaction that your family will suffer as well, with your children or somehow. So, there's another interesting example about free will, and it's a very interesting story of, actually, we were talking about this the other day, Dostoevsky. Anyone know the Dostoevsky, the brothers Karamazov? Beautiful book. So one of the brothers, Ivan, right, or Ivan, he argues with his brother who's a monk, his younger brother. What's his name? Alyosha. And he's arguing about, ultimately he's kind of paraphrasing the spirit of the times, which is, we would see most in the secular modern world today. In America, for example, it said more than ever people are turning away from any conception of God. They're saying this is all just forcing people into subservience, and it's a negative thing actually. And so Ivan kind of gives this example. It's a very interesting story within a story, because it talks about political states and also ultimately the state of the self, the being, in our rebellion, you could say. A rebellion against love, which is really through suffering we come to a state of vengeance and turning away. So he gives the example of Christ. Anyone knows this very famous story? Remember this one? He says, Ivan tells a story to his brother Alyosha. Tirtha knows this story. He said, one time Christ came back, the second coming, because that's what was predicted, right? Christ will come back. So Christ came back when? In the 15th century, at the height of the Inquisition in Spain. And he came back and he started doing miracles, healed people, saved people. And what happened? Very quickly, within a day or two, he was seized by the Inquisition. He was put in prison, and the next day he was to be killed as a heretic. This is all being told as like a fiction by the brother to explain his crisis of faith. So what's very interesting in this story is that the inquisitor comes into the prison to meet Christ, and he recognizes him because Christ said, it's me. Don't you understand? It's me. He said, I don't care. Anyhow, we're going to kill you. He said, if you come now, you're going to mess up the mission of the church. You're going to mess up the mission of the church. And he gave him 3 reasons why. You know the story? He told him 3 reasons why he was going to destroy the church. He said that when Christ was tempted by Satan, the devil, right, on the mount, said you could turn stone to bread. And if you were thrown off a cliff, you would be caught by angels, and I will give you sovereignty or rulership over all the kingdoms of the world. He gave him 3 temptations, the temptations of Christ, and Christ denied all of them. He said, that was your biggest mistake. He said, why not feed everyone? Turn the stone into bread and feed everyone. If you were thrown off the cliff and caught by angels, everyone would accept you as God and their Savior. And if you were ruling the whole world, then you would be protecting people from suffering and sin, because you would be the undisputed ruler. And instead you taught humility and meekness and love and service. So that was your mistake. It's very interesting. He gets into this argument. He says humanity They don't deserve, they're not ready for the freedom you gave them, the freedom of responsibility. We have free will and responsibility. What we say is that our free will and our responsibility is non-different from our consciousness. Because to have consciousness, what distinguishes consciousness from dead matter is the ability to make choice and to have rational thought. Why? You can program a computer to make choices, right? To make decisions. But you can't program a computer to have free will. So that's the difference between real consciousness. Real consciousness isn't just ones and zeros. Yeah?
But wait, sorry.
It's a lot of different ideas.
No, I'm an idiot.
Yeah.
Because I probably am.
No.
Why wouldn't Jesus say, okay, fine, I'll jump off the cliff and my angels will save me because that will prove that I'm Jesus? Why not? Why not do that?
Yeah, that's the whole argument. That's the whole discussion.
Can you explain it to an idiot person?
It's not really taken as such. Like, basically, people still have to choose to believe. They can't be forced to love. That's the basic argument. It's kind of a more meta argument. I was just thinking about it on a surface kind of level a little bit. It's a very interesting and a very difficult subject matter because you've seen it played out in the last few centuries. Right? Nietzsche would talk about it, the death of God. And you look at the way society is going, it's going towards a kind of totalitarian world state, which is in essence, basically what the Inquisitor said, to get back to the story. We could all give our opinions on it. But what the Inquisitor told him is that it's better that you leave and don't disturb us. He said, the church now, what we're doing is we're serving Satan in your name because we agree with his ideas more. Keep people enslaved but happy in ignorance. That was his commandment. He said, the burden of your free will is too great and you cannot use it properly. But to take away and force them to love you is also a kind of violence. So we say with God, it's like, why does God make people suffer? He said, no. But we say, well, why did he give us free will? Because by our free will, we can choose wrong. So why he didn't choose those things, that's kind of an interesting topic on its own, because we see, he already did plenty of miracles. I don't think it's a question of miracles or not miracles. It's the idea of, taking away responsibility. Because that's why he said, why don't you just become the ruler of the whole world and force everyone to love you? Why don't you just take over everything and force them to love you? He said, no, that would be taking away their free will. You can't force someone to love because that's a form of violence. But then giving someone free will and the ability to turn away to commit evil, then you can use that to blame God. But what the Inquisitor did is it's described that he was going to release Christ, but he said, don't come back and leave and never disturb us again in the church. He said, we're using the name of God, but we're preaching the philosophy of the devil. Right? That means just enjoy in this world. You don't have free will. Don't worry about the future or the past. Take all guilt or any weight. There is no God. Imagine there's no heaven, there's no hell, there's nothing. Just enjoy in this world. And then our Gurudev would say it's just called the brotherhood of man. Without God is just described to be like a guild of thieves. That's what he would describe it as. We'll all be happy together like thieves. We're all stealing, and it's called, in Hindi we say, hum bhi chup, tum bhi chup. I won't say anything, you don't say anything. I won't say anything, you won't say anything. Let's all get along, otherwise we'll cause suffering to each other. But it's all based still on selfishness and misdirection and exploitation. If you look in the world, if it was a perfect world right now, then there wouldn't be war, there wouldn't be violence, there wouldn't be hatred. So who is to blame? Dostoevsky said, or Solzhenitsyn said, the line between good and evil runs in every human heart. So we're ultimately responsible. We're ultimately responsible. Suffering is a reaction for our actions. So that's the horrible realization of that sufferings I have given to others have come to bear fruit in my life. As Christ also said, right? As you sow, so shall you reap. That's the law of karma. So suffering that comes in my life isn't the fault of another. In this parable he said Satan would say, better to keep people in ignorance and keep them happy. So that's kind of what we see in our society. Give you a phone, give you VR goggles, give you a bodysuit that makes you feel the enjoyments of sex and all these things without having any responsibility, right? Condoms, whatever it is. Enjoy without responsibility and stay in ignorance. That's kind of like the mandate, the direction of the world in one way. There's a battle, right, going on. And one side, it's the metaverse, right? Facebook now became Meta. And the principle of Meta is just to be in a fictional reality, right? To choose whatever your life you want it to be, but to basically be deeper in illusion and to be distracted. Social media is designed to distract you, whether it's TikTok or Instagram or Facebook, all outward perception and distraction. So what we say is giving up responsibility. If we're just trying to live in this illusory world in ignorance, it's actually giving up the responsibility of human life. Human life itself is a responsibility. And it's a responsibility to ourselves, achieve beyond birth and death, achieve true self-knowledge, self-realization or liberation, so that, and also those around us, help them achieve liberation. Because I can care for them and love them, but they're still going to suffer. No matter how much I love my family, they're still going to experience suffering, old age, disease, and death. No matter how much I love them. So if I really love them enough that I want to save them, then I should help. Through whatever path, whatever process, whatever realization, whatever knowledge. So for us, it's the path of love and devotion. One thing I've seen in my life, because I've lived as a monk since I was just a kid. In school, I was going, but when I finished high school, I lived in India for 16 years. And ever since then, I've been practicing as a monk. And I've never done any of the things that most people think was what makes you happy. But I'm usually pretty happy. And it's because my happiness doesn't come from trying to seek to be happy for myself, for my own reasons. It's described that real love, to go to the point of bhakti. Bhakti, means real love and devotion, means to please those you love, or have a desire to please those you love, to make them happy. That is the source of your happiness. If you're living in that way, then even when you're externally, you may be having a bad day, but in your heart, you're simply trying to please those you love, and so you can be happy in that. And the reality is that in this sense, you can do that with someone who doesn't have the capacity to really reciprocate. In this world, most people can't fully reciprocate with your love. But if you have a relationship with the self of the self, like in the story of Krishna when he expanded and everyone showed so much more love because they were loving the self of the self at that point. They were watering the root of the tree with their love. So at that point, they were fully fulfilled. So we describe it being like pouring your cup full of honey. The relationship you have inside, you should come to such a state of fulfillment and beauty and happiness inside that you're always able to give to others your love as well, and it's always being replenished. But in terms of your relationship with God, it said, Najani apane sukh sabhivancha tara sukh. Those who are described to be the pure devotees, the lovers of God, their happiness is only derived from pleasing God, who they love. That's the source of their bliss. And so how do you know if you're pleasing? Generally we say it's under guidance. That's why the Lord appears in the form of the guide, the teacher, to bring you to Him. And so until you follow that kind of instruction, and then okay, this is pleasing, this is not pleasing, this is right, this is wrong. So you need that kind of guidance. But the essence is that happiness comes from love, and we are not just living alone individually in this world, we are living together with others. So how to serve the root of existence, which is also what we are connected to. And if we serve that, we'll also be happy. But it comes from giving and sharing and loving. Because then you can be happy even when you're not happy. And then when you are happy, you'll be blissful. Like I say, you can be outside on a sunny day, just sitting on a bench, and you'll be blissful. And then when you're ecstatic, you're overjoyed. So you can be truly happy if you're not simply seeking to satisfy and please yourself. Because if you're trying to always please and satisfy yourself, it's like chasing the carrot on the stick. It's always going away. Happiness is an endpoint. It's frustrating. Like I'm going to work for 30 years, then I'm going to retire and be able to buy a house, or pay off my house and retire and enjoy. So you're chasing happiness as an endpoint instead of just being happy in the moment. But how to be happy at every moment is to have a strong relationship. And the strongest relationship we can have is with the self of the self. Truly, that is Bhakti Yoga. There's a verse that talks about what is our human responsibility. Savai pungsam paro dharma, responsibility, you could call it dharma. Our highest dharma, topmost dharma, is develop love for God, relationship with God. In whatever way you want to call it. That is our topmost dharma. And so in doing that, yayatma samprasiddhi, we will be satisfied and always happy in giving of happiness. In the mood of the heart, in the bhav, it's a mood and it's an action. Bhav and a kriya. Bhakti is bhav and kriya. A mood and an action. So the mood is the desire to please those you love. And if they are pleased, simply by your action of endeavoring to please them, you become happy because it's fulfilling you. It's fulfillment, not just happiness. You become fulfilled by trying to bring happiness to those you love. Even in this world, like with your family, if you show love to someone, like if you give them flowers or you give a gift or you speak sweetly with them, you get some happiness in serving others. So in service to others, you achieve happiness. So in service and love for God, which is service is the action of love, and love is the mood. So there's the emotion or the love itself, and then there's the action of the love, which is the service. And that gives you happiness. So therefore it's serving the self of the self. Then it's not self-based, it's the deepest self.
And what if I don't have any emotion inside while serving? Just like no emotion, no love inside.
So there's described to be love sometimes is developed. There's no point where you could say someone you love, like, oh, that was the moment you love them. Love is a stage of it also develops. The first stage of love is just the desire and the will to try. Like you may not love someone yet, but you think, oh, I'll try to do something nice for them. Maybe I'll develop love. In terms of our relationship with God, we're very confused and we're a little bit rebellious and we've suffered so much, and so we tend to blame it on our parents, in this sense, God. And so to come to love is a process. We say, in the beginning, it's like jaundice. It's described to be a disease of jaundice means when you eat something sweet, it tastes bitter. When you eat something sweet, it tastes bitter when you have jaundice. The remedy for the jaundice is to eat sugar, like sugar candy specifically. And so it cures the jaundice. So it's described to be like the jaundice of ignorance. So even if you have a little bit of faith or desire, that's like the seed of pure love. So it's enough to start. Sevanam bhakti ruchate. The action is enough to start. But you can start to develop the mood by favorable association, by good company. You become like what you associate with. So it's described like a crystal is transparent, a clear crystal, but it reflects the light that's in it and changes its color. Pink light becomes pink, blue light becomes blue. So by being in the association that is loving and has that can gradually awaken. Yeah.
Can you tell more about this connection with yourself? You say it's so important, but how practically I can do this more to love myself, for example? No?
So that's what we say. First, love the self, right? Love the self of the self. Develop your love for God, and it's a sadhana. Ultimately, spiritual life is a sadhana. You have a goal and you have a process. So the process is, in our path, there's 9 main processes to develop love for God. And love for God will also... God already loves you, but because it's like you love someone, you're in a relationship with someone, but you've left them and you're suffering, you don't know why. And they love you, but you have to choose to come and develop that relationship. You both have to make that choice. So God, as we hear, He already loves us, but we have to develop that love. So there's 9 ways to develop that love. To hear about the attractive pastimes, to sing, or what we do, our chanting, our kirtan, our mantras, japa. We chant this, sometimes 4 or 5 hours a day we're chanting mantras. For example, in our line, we're supposed to chant 100,000 names. It sounds like a big task, right? 4 or 5 hours a day in our mind and verbally chanting this mantra, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. My teacher in India chants this like 200,000 times a day in the mind and out loud. Right? Why? Because it's not just a sadhana, it's the goal also. Because the beauty of it is that God is not different from His name. And so by calling His name, even internally, you're invoking His presence. It's not that He doesn't already exist, He's not all present everywhere, but you're turning towards that relationship. He's right there. It's described the body is the tree, and there's two birds sitting in the tree, the soul and the super soul, the Atma, the Paramatma. So your attention is focused on the outside world. You just need to turn your attention back to the source. That's what spiritual life is. The burden that we are is just eating the fruits of the tree of the world, the senses, the objects of the senses, and the God Himself is just witnessing our action. So if we turn our attention by chanting His names, we develop relationship. So the mantra specifically we chant starts with the word Hare, which means to love. It's the name for Radha, and her name means to love God. And so by chanting it, we're attracting that love into our life and praying for it and praying for that relationship. Hare Krishna. Krishna is the reservoir of all beauty and sweetness. So we're developing that relationship with God by chanting the mantra. That's one of the processes. Meditation, there's various activities, sadhanas, Padasevanam, different services we perform, Archanam, loving prayers, developing a mood of friendship, developing a mood of that I am part of the whole, therefore my best way to be happy is whatever part of the body I am, I should fulfill my duty. Right? I'm not the stomach, I'm like the hands and the feet. So the hand and the feet serve the stomach, and then the stomach serves the whole body. Right? The stomach digests the food, and then the whole body is energized. So you water the root of the tree, the whole tree is energized. So we call it the ninefold path of devotion. Hearing, chanting, remembering, serving, developing a mood of prayer and worship, developing a mood of friendship and service, and self-surrender completely. That's, as we understand, how to realize. Now, when we chant this mantra, there's described to be 7 excellent results. This mantra that we chant most famously, Hare Krishna, why? Because we chant this mantra so much. Right? It's not that we don't chant a lot of other stuff, but this one specifically is described to be that mantra of deliverance. Maha mantra means the great mantra that delivers the mind from the web of Maya, illusion, or the ocean of samsara. So the mantra, if we chant any mantra, but if mantra with real potency, if you look at it, even well-being. I was recently doing a talk, and there's very interesting studies have been done. For example, the National Institute of Health, the National Center for Biotechnology Information in the US, they've done a lot of research on mantra chanting, not just random mantras, but on this Maha Mantra. Because they say you can chant random sounds, random words, but it's not as effective as this. They did studies on stress, they did studies on mental health, and by chanting this mantra even for 20 minutes a day, it improved the cortisol levels, it released stress, and it increased people's well-being significantly. They did it with nursing professionals. They had very high stress levels, and for 20 minutes a day, they had them chant this mantra, and it improved their life quite significantly. So there's been a lot of research done on kind of mantra sound healing. Even like if you do it with water, right? If you take water and you blast really negative or heavy energy music, it adjusts the structure when you freeze it and you look at a molecular level. So the same way with mantras. If you use positive mantra sound vibration, if it can affect water, the body is 80-90% water. So the mantra chanting, it brings the whole body into harmony, right?
So you're saying that they've done a study and they got people to sing random words. And
yes.
They got them to sing the Maha Mantra.
And Maha Mantra is much more effective.
How? What's the explanation for that? That it's connected to God?
Just this, like this.
They don't know the explanation. It's just a basic study.
So they tried this and this, and it happened like that.
If you're interested, I can show you the studies. The National Institute for Health and the National Center for Biotechnology Information.
So then the explanation for that would be that there is a connection to God when you chant.
Proper mantras aren't just made up sounds. Like I can just chant Om Bob Dum Dum. It's like, what's the potency behind it? Like I can make up any sound vibration and call it a mantra. But in essence, you can say what's the scientific explanation, what's the spiritual explanation. The problem with science is that it mostly deals with matter, not consciousness. They don't understand consciousness. So there's a conscious explanation, but it's a spiritual explanation. There's two kinds of sound. There's Shabda Brahma, Shabda Samanya, material sound and spiritual sound. Spiritual sound is much more potent. The name of God is, you could say, it's a very interesting discussion, but basically it's shown that it actually works. I can give you the studies. It's very interesting. They did it with the University of Pennsylvania as well. They've had lots of studies in this mantra sound. Anyway, when you chant this mantra, there's 7 results that are described by our Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who is, in our understanding, Radha Krishna incarnate again about 550 years ago. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said that by chanting the mantra loudly in kirtan or also in a japa, which is your own like mantra meditation, leads to 7 results. The first of which is real self-knowledge. It's the first result. Cheto darpana marjanam. So we've been talking a lot, self-realization, self-knowledge, this, that. But really coming into it says it's not just I'm not the body, I'm not the mind. What is the nature of the soul? What is the color of the soul? What is the age of the soul? What is the appearance? What is the name? What are the features? Or is it just nothing? Like it has actual reality transcendent, what we call the swarup, the inner essence. The soul is like a seed of consciousness. When the seed sprouts and develops, what is its nature? So its nature is in relationship with God, either in fraternity or friendship, as a parental mood, what's called a love. There's different kinds of love. There's essentially 5 kinds of love in relationship with God. The love of like passive, like a yogi, and the bliss that comes from that integration and wholeness and relationship. The love of someone who is like a loving servant. The love of someone who's like an intimate friend. The intimate friends, like the cowherd boys, they're serving Krishna by wrestling and fighting. Right? That's their service. They're pleasing him and they're being pleased by him. So ultimately your service becomes pure service when you're becoming joyful. Right? But in the meantime, it's a process. But then the parents, Mother Yashoda, you can have that kind of, it's called Vatsalya Ras, the relationship of parental love. And then the relationship of romantic love, what's called Madhurya Ras. And that itself has parts. So it's a very interesting, it's called like the topic of rasa and rasology. It's a very interesting topic itself. Maybe tonight we'll talk about it. That's interesting. You maybe, show me what you know about this after we finish here in a minute. I'm interested.
I just found this study where it's like bad sounds and how it looks after on microscope and like good sounds and how it affects it.
Masuru Emoto.
Yeah, I'll show you afterwards. National Institute for Health, NIH, and NCBI both did studies on this. Specifically on the Mahamantra. Recently, 2018 and 2019, they did long studies on it. In 2018 and 2019. So I just want to go through these results really quickly. We say if you actually give a time to because there's a lot of intellectual knowledge you can gain. Most of the things we do, it's like it may be good for this life, for time and space now, but what about for the true like transcendent self beyond this time and beyond birth and death? So the mantra first develops Cheto Dharpana Marjanam. It cleanses away all the ignorance of false ego, the false self, and awakens the true self. Like what am I really? What is my, like we say, fulfillment. There's the hierarchy of needs. Have you heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs? The basic level of the hierarchy of needs is food, shelter, and so forth. Next level is family, belonging, and then it goes purpose in this life. Like, what is my purpose in life? Beyond that, what is my full self-actualization? For us, self-actualization means beyond the material false self. Not the false self, but the dream of that. We're in the dream now that this is who I am only, but I'm not the body, I'm not the hand, I'm not, like we say, I'm not the eyes that see, I'm not the ears that hear, I'm not the tongue that tastes. I'm the taster, the hearer, the seer, behind that, deeper than that, the unseen seer, the unknown knower. What is that? So first, to really know the self, that's the result of the chanting. The second result is that all suffering is extinguished like a forest fire when it rains. Bhava Mahadda Vagni Nirvapanam. So you're inviting that power of grace into your life that will ultimately destroy all suffering. That's the second result. The third result is described to be the soul is like a lotus that blossoms when the moonbeams of good fortune arise in one's life. That's the third result. So by chanting and by following this process, and it's not just one thing, Guru Padashrai, taking shelter of spiritual master and following the process. These are all limbs of the spiritual path. But specifically the chanting is very important. The third result is that good fortune dawns in your life, and the soul begins to blossom like a lotus. Consciousness begins to develop. Human life, consciousness is supposed to fully blossom. That means self-realization. Fully blossomed consciousness is described to be self-realization. So then, fourth result, all spiritual knowledge is realized. Vidya vadu jivanam. You realize all transcendental knowledge. Fifth result, anandam buddhi vardhanam. Bliss is always rising. You're always being more and more joyful. It's not external like happiness, like you're a bliss bunny, but it's an internal state of true fulfillment, true meaning, and ever-rising joy. The joy of the knowledge of your relationship and your belonging, and the sweetness in that relationship, in whatever rasa, whatever mood of relationship of love you have. Anandam buddhivardhanam pratipadam. That joy becomes so powerful that the sixth step is described to be tasting bliss at every step. Pratipadam purna amrita swadanam. And the last step is described to be sarvatma snapanam, complete snapanam, purification or bathing of the self so that there's no contamination whatsoever. That means, you could say, it's ultimate transcendence. So those are the 7 stages. So to know yourself, we say, know yourself and know your relationship, then put time into it, and that will lead to everything. But really the power is in the mantra. The power is in the mantra. If you were to say, what's one thing I could do, it's to chant the mantra. And then that will lead to everything else, to the knowledge, right? That will automatically come as a result. Knowing yourself, destroying suffering, right? The cause of suffering. In material life in the West, you only deal with the symptoms, not the causes. So what we say is, just deal with the cause, the root of the problem of good and evil in this world, the root of the problem of suffering. Putting out fires all the time, it's like managers, right? This is a problem, dealing with all the problems. They deal with the root of all problems. Then you won't have to deal with any of those problems any longer. So for us, really, it's this process. Our gurus would say, theoretically, try it out. You don't have to fully adopt it. Give it a chance. Be like a student. Open yourself to the possibility of experience. Become open to the possibility of the experience. All right, sorry for a long-winded answer. I don't know if it was helpful at all. But in essence, we do our best in this life to be a good person, to take care of those we're responsible for, to love them truly, and then ultimately to take care of our own responsibility as well, to know the self and the search for meaning beyond suffering. It can't be found just in responsibility in this life, because there's certain things that are inevitable that we cannot overcome, which is the suffering of birth, death, old age, and disease. So how do we solve that problem? If we really truly care for those we love, we should help them escape the suffering in samsara as well. That's our philosophy. Yes?
How can we help with people who already passed? Our parents, grandparents, if we want to help them. We don't know how they are going, where, or successful on the way to
So the best way we can help, it's said that all our ancestors are also benefited by us ourselves. Like if you save yourself, you end up saving everyone close around you. That's one of our,
in our Bhagavatam. But without saving ourselves.
There's a story of Prahlad Maharaj. It's a long story, but basically it's described that by him becoming such a pure devotee, and all his ancestors backwards and forwards were saved for up to 21 generations. So it means they're benefited, they gain such sukriti by that, or pious merit by that they go on the upward path. All right, so I'll stop there for now. Any other questions? Bhakti Yoga is a very interesting, important topic. Perhaps if you have time, tonight we're going to talk more sweetly and specifically. This is kind of more of an overview. I wanted to give a talk on Friday and Saturday I was giving a talk specifically on Bhakti Yoga and similarities between our thought process, and you could see a lot of the Christian teachings of Jesus, how there's connections of a lot of the mood between our different faiths, and what is the underlying essence of it all in relationship. So I will be speaking very specifically about Bhakti Yoga. The last few days I was trying to talk on suffering and good and evil, and I'm very interested by this especially this story from Dostoevsky's novel about the brothers Karamazov. Very interesting, that story of Christ returning, and it's a very deep problem also, right? The problem of responsibility, truly. It's like we have responsibility because we have free will. So that means we have to take full responsibility. What does it mean to take full responsibility? It means any problems I suffer are as consequence to my own actions. And that can free me from the problem of suffering, because then I can act in such a way to not continue that cycle. I can accept the things I can't change and accept what comes to me without harming and continuing that cycle, and also taking action to get